Section 37 of the Book of Household Management. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Book of Household Management by Isabella Beeton. Recipes. Chapter 17, Part 1. Pork cutlets, cold meat cookery. 796. Ingredients: the remains of cold roast loin of pork, 1 ounce of butter, 2 onions, 1 dessertspoonful of flour, half a pint of gravy, pepper and salt to taste, 1 teaspoonful of vinegar and mustard. Mode. Cut the pork into nice-sized cutlets, trim off most of the fat, and chop the onions. Put the butter into a stewpan, lay in the cutlets and chopped onions, and fry a light brown. Then add the remaining ingredients, simmer gently for 5 or 7 minutes, and serve. Time 5 to 7 minutes. Average cost, exclusive of the meat, 4d. Seasonable from October to March. Austrian method of herding pigs. In the Austrian Empire there are a great number of wild swine, while amongst the wandering tribes peopling the interior of Hungary and spreading over the vast steppes of that country, droves of swine form a great proportion of the wealth of the people, who chiefly live on coarse bread and wind-dried bacon. In German Switzerland, the Tyrol, and other mountainous districts of continental Europe, though the inhabitants almost everywhere, as in England, keep 1 or more pigs, they are at little or no trouble in feeding them, 1 or more men being employed by one or several villages as swineherds, who at a certain hour every morning call for the pig or pigs, and, driving them to their feeding grounds on the mountain side and in the wood, take custody of the herd till, on the approach of night, they are collected into a compact body and driven home for a night's repose in their several sties. The amount of intelligence and docility displayed by the pigs in these mountain regions is much more considerable than that usually allowed to this animal, and the manner in which these immense herds of swine are collected and again distributed without an accident or mistake is a sight both curious and interesting, for it is all done without the assistance of a dog or the aid even of the human voice, and solely by the crack of the long-lashed and heavily loaded whip which the swineherd carries, and cracks much after the fashion of the French postilion, and which, though he frequently cracks, waking 100 sharp echoes from the woods and rocks, he seldom has to use correctionally, the animal soon acquiring a thorough knowledge of the meaning of each crack, and once having felt its leathern thong, a lasting remembrance of its power. At early dawn the swineherd takes his stand at the outskirts of the first village, and begins flourishing through the misty air his immensely long lash, keeping a sort of rude time with the crack, 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 crack of his whip. The nearest pigs, hearing the well-remembered sound, rouse from their straw and rush from their sties into the road, followed by all their litters. As soon as sufficient number are collected, the drove is set in motion, receiving, right and left as they advance, fresh numbers, whole communities or solitary individuals streaming in from all quarters and taking their place without distinction in the general herd, and, as if conscious where their breakfast lay, without wasting a moment on idle investigation, all eagerly push on to the mountains. In this manner village after village is collected, till the drove not infrequently consists of several thousands. The feeding ground has, of course, often to be changed, and the drove have sometimes to be driven many miles, and to a considerable height up the mountain, before the whip gives a signal for the dispersion of the body and the order to feed, when the herdsman proceeds to form himself a shelter and look after his own comfort for the rest of the day. As soon as twilight sets in, the whip is again heard echoing the signal for muster, and in the same order in which they were collected, the swine are driven back, each group tailing off to its respective sty as the herd approaches the villages, till, the last grunter having found his home, the drover seeks his cottage and repose. Pork cutlets or chops. 1. 797. Ingredients: loin of pork, pepper and salt to taste. Mode. Cut the cutlets from a delicate loin of pork. Bone and trim them neatly, and cut away the greater part of the fat. Season them with pepper, place the gridiron on the fire. When quite hot, lay on the chops and boil them for about 1/4 hour, turning them 3 or 4 times, and be particular that they are thoroughly done, but not dry. Dish them, sprinkle over a little fine salt, and serve plain, or with tomato sauce, sauce piquante, or pickled gherkins, a few of which should be laid round the dish as a garnish. Time. About 1/4 hour. Average cost, 10d. per pound for chops. Sufficient. Allow 6 for 4 persons. Seasonable from October to March. 2. Another way. 798. Ingredients: loin or foreloin of pork, egg and bread crumbs, salt and pepper to taste. To every tablespoonful of bread crumbs allow 1/2 teaspoonful of minced sage, clarified butter. Mode. Cut the cutlets from a loin or foreloin of pork, trim them the same as mutton cutlets, and scrape the top part of the bone. Brush them over with egg, sprinkle with bread crumbs, with which have been mixed minced sage and a seasoning of pepper and salt. Drop a little clarified butter on them, and press the crumbs well down. Put the frying pan on the fire, put in some lard. When this is hot, lay in the cutlets, and fry them a light brown on both sides. Take them out, put them before the fire to dry the greasy moisture from them, and dish them on mashed potatoes. Serve with them any sauce that may be preferred, such as tomato sauce, sauce piquante, sauce Robert, or pickled gherkin. Time. From 15 to 20 minutes. Average cost, 10d. per pound for chops. Sufficient. Allow 6 cutlets for 4 persons. Seasonable from October to March. Note. The remains of roast loin of pork may be dressed in the same manner. Pork cheese, an excellent breakfast dish. 799. Ingredients: 2 lbs. of cold roast pork, pepper and salt to taste, 1 dessertspoonful of minced parsley, 4 leaves of sage, a very small bunch of savoury herbs, 2 blades of pounded mace, a little nutmeg, 1/2 teaspoonful of minced lemon peel, good strong gravy sufficient to fill the mould. Mode. Cut, but do not chop the pork into fine pieces, and allow 1/4 pound of fat to each pound of lean. Season with pepper and salt, pound well the spices, and chop finely the parsley, sage, herbs, and lemon peel, and mix the whole nicely together. Put it into a mould, fill up with good strong well-flavoured gravy, and bake rather more than 1 hour. When cold, turn it out of the mould. Time. Rather more than 1 hour. Seasonable from October to March. Roast leg of pork. 800. Ingredients: leg of pork, a little oil for stuffing. See recipe No. 504. Mode. Choose a small leg of pork, and score the skin across in narrow strips, about 1/4 inch apart. Cut a slit in the knuckle, loosen the skin, and fill it with a sage and onion stuffing, made by recipe No. 504. Brush the joint over with a little salad oil. This makes the cracked thing crisper and a better colour, and put it down to a bright clear fire, not too near, as that would cause the skin to blister. Baste it well, and serve with a little gravy made in the dripping pan, and do not omit to send to table with it a tureen of well-made apple sauce. See No. 363. Time. A leg of pork weighing 8 pounds, about 3 hours. Average cost, 9d. per pound. Sufficient for 6 or 7 persons. Seasonable from September to March. English mode of hunting and Indian pig sticking. The hunting of the wild boar has been in all times, and in all countries, a pastime of the highest interest and excitement, and from the age of Nimrod has only been considered second to the more dangerous sport of lion hunting. The buried treasures of Nineveh, restored to us by Mr. Layard, show us, on their sculptured annals, the kings of Assyria in their royal pastime of boar hunting. That the Greeks were passionately attached to this sport we know both from history and the romantic fables of the poets. Mark Antony, at one of his breakfasts with Cleopatra, had 8 wild boars roasted whole, and though the Romans do not appear to have been addicted to hunting, wild boar fights formed part of their gladiatorial shows in the amphitheatre. In France, Germany, and Britain, from the earliest time, the boar hunt formed one of the most exciting of sports, but it was only in this country that the sport was conducted without dogs, a real hand-to-hand contest of man and beast. A hunter armed only with a boar spear, a weapon about 4 feet long, the ash staff, guarded by plates of steel, and terminating in a long, narrow, and very sharp blade. This, with a hunting knife or hanger, completed his offensive arms. Thus equipped, the hunter would either encounter his enemy face to face, confront his desperate charge, as with erect tail, depressed head, and flaming eyes, he rushed with his foamy tusks full against him, who either sought to pierce his victuals through his counter, or, driving his spear through his chine, transfix his heart, or, failing those more difficult aims, plunge it into his flank, and, without withdrawing the weapon, strike his ready hanger into his throat. But expert as the hunter might be, it was not often the formidable brute was so quickly dispatched, for he would sometimes seize the spear in his powerful teeth and nip it off like a reed, or, coming full tilt on his enemy, by his momentum and weight bear him to the earth, ripping up with a horrid gash his leg or side, and before the writhing hunter could draw his knife, the infuriated beast would plunge his snout in the wound and rip with savage teeth the bowels of his victim. At other times he would suddenly swerve from his charge, and, doubling on his opponent, attack the hunter in the rear. From his speed, great weight, and savage disposition, the wild boar is always a dangerous antagonist, and requires great courage, coolness, and agility on the part of the hunter. The continental sportsman rides to the chase in a cavalcade, with music and dogs, a kind of small hound or mastiff, and leaving all the honorary part of the contest to them, when the boar is becoming weary, and while beset by the dogs, rides up and drives his lance home in the beast's back or side. Boar hunting has been for some centuries obsolete in England, animal no longer existing in a wild state amongst us. But in our Indian Empire, and especially in Bengal, the pastime is pursued by our countrymen with all the daring of the national character, and as the animal which inhabits the cane-brakes and jungles is a formidable foe, the sport is attended with great excitement. The hunters, mounted on small, active horses, and armed only with long lances, ride at earliest daylight to the skirts of the jungle, and, having sent in their attendants to beat the cover, wait till the tusked monster comes crashing from amongst the canes, when the chase is immediately given, until he is come up with and transfixed by the first weapon. Instead of flight, however, he often turns to bay, and by more than one dead horse and wounded hunter shows how formidable he is, and what those polished tusks, sharp as pitchforks, can effect when the enraged animal defends his life. To glaze ham. See recipe No. 430. Hashed pork. 801. Ingredients: the remains of cold roast pork, 2 onions, 1 teaspoonful of flour, 2 blades of pounded mace, 2 cloves, 1 teaspoonful of vinegar, half a pint of gravy, pepper and salt to taste. Mode. Chop the onions and fry them a nice brown. Cut the pork into thin slices, season them with pepper and salt, and add these to the remaining ingredients. Stew gently for about half an hour, and serve garnished with sippets of toasted bread. Time. Half an hour. Average cost, exclusive of the meat, 3d. Seasonable from October to March. Fried rashers of bacon and poached egg. 802. Ingredients: bacon, Eggs. Mode. Cut the bacon into thin slices, trim away the rusty parts, and cut off the rind. Put it into a cold frying pan, that is to say, do not place the pan on the fire before the bacon is in it. Turn it 2 or 3 times, and dish it on a very hot dish. Poach the eggs and slip them on to the bacon without breaking the yolks, and serve quickly. Time. 3 or 4 minutes. Average cost, 10d. to a shilling per pound for the primest parts. Sufficient. Allows 6 eggs for 3 persons. Seasonable at any time. Note. Fried rashers of bacon, curled, serve as a pretty garnish to many dishes, and for small families answer very well as a substitute for boiled bacon to serve with a small dish of poultry, etc. Broiled rashers of bacon, a breakfast dish. 803. Before purchasing bacon, ascertain that it is perfectly free from rust, which may be easily detected by its yellow colour, and for broiling, the streaked part of the thick flank is generally the most esteemed. Cut it into thin slices, take off the rind, and broil over a nice clear fire. Turn it 2 or 3 times, and serve very hot. Should there be any cold bacon left from the previous day, it answers very well for breakfast, cut into slices, and broiled or fried. Time. 3 or 4 minutes. Average cost, 10d. to a shilling per pound for the primest parts. Seasonable at any time. Note. When the bacon is cut very thin, the slices may be curled round and fastened by means of small skewers, and fried or toasted before the fire. Boiled bacon. 804. Ingredients. Bacon, water. Mode. As bacon is frequently excessively salt, let it be soaked in warm water for an hour or 2 previous to dressing it. Then pare off the rusty parts, and scrape the underside and rind as clean as possible. Put it into a saucepan of cold water, let it come gradually to a boil, and as fast as the scum rises to the surface of the water, remove it. Let it simmer very gently until it is thoroughly done. Then take it up, strip off the skin, and sprinkle over the bacon a few bread raspings, and garnish with tufts of cauliflower or Brussels sprouts. When served alone, young and tender broad beans or green peas are the usual accompaniment. Time. 1 pound of bacon, 3/4 of an hour. 2 pounds, 1 to 1 1/2 hours. Average cost, 10d. to a shilling per pound for the primest parts. Sufficient. 2 pounds, when served with poultry or veal, sufficient for 10 persons. Suitable at any time. To cure bacon in the Wiltshire way. 805. Ingredients. 1 1/2 lb. of coarse sugar, 1 1/2 lb. of bay salt, 6 oz. of saltpetre, 1 lb. of common salt. Mode. Sprinkle each flitch with salt, and let the blood drain off for 24 hours. Then pound and mix the above ingredients well together, and rub it well into the meat, which should be turned every day for a month. Then hang it to dry, and afterwards smoke it for 10 days. Time. To remain in the pickle 1 month. To be smoked 10 days. Sufficient. The above quantity of salt for 1 pig. How pigs were formerly pastured and fed. Though unquestionably far greater numbers of swine are now kept in England than formerly, every peasant having one or more of that useful animal, in feudal times immense droves of pigs were kept by the franklins and barons. In those days the swine herds being a regular part of the domestic service of every feudal household, their duty consisted in daily driving the herd of swine from the cattle yard or outlying farm to the nearest woods, chase, or forest, where the franklin or vavasor had, either by right or grant, what was called free warren, or the liberty to feed his hogs off the acorns, beech, and chestnuts that lay in such abundance on the earth, and far exceeded the power of the royal or privileged game to consume. Indeed, it was a licence granted the nobles of free warren, especially for their swine, that kept up the iniquitous forest laws to so late a date, and covered so large a portion of the land with such immense tracts of wood and brake, to the injury of agriculture and the misery of the people. Some idea of the extent to which swine were grazed in feudal times may be formed by observing the number of pigs still fed in Epping Forest, the Forest of Dean, and the New Forest in Hampshire, where, for several months of the year, the beech nuts and acorns yield them so plentiful a diet. In Germany, where the chestnut is so largely cultivated, the amount of food shed every autumn is enormous, and consequently the pig, both wild and domestic, has for a considerable portion of the year an unfailing supply of admirable nourishment. Impressed with the value of this fruit for the food of pigs, the Prince Consort has, with great judgment, of late encouraged the collection of chestnuts in Windsor Park, and by giving a small reward to old people and children for every bushel collected, has not only found an occupation for many of the unemployed poor, but by providing a gratuitous food for their pig, encouraged a feeling of providence and economy. For curing bacon and keeping it free from rust. Cobbett's recipe. 806. The two sides that remain, and which are called flitches, are to be cured for bacon. They are first rubbed with salt on the insides or flesh sides, then placed one on the other, the flesh sides uppermost, in a salting trough which has a gutter around its edges to drain away the brine. For, to have sweet and fine bacon, the flitches must not be sopping in brine, which gives it the sort of vile taste that barrel and sea pork have. Every one knows how different is the taste of fresh dry salt from that of salt in a dissolved state. Therefore change the salt often, once in 4 or 5 days. Let it melt and sink in, but not lie too long. Twice change the flitches, put that at the bottom which was first on the top. This mode will cost you a great deal more in salt than the sopping mode, but without it your bacon will not be so sweet and fine, nor keep so well. As for the time required in making your flitches sufficiently salt, it depends on circumstances. It takes a longer time for a thick than a thin flitch, and longer in dry than in damp weather, or in a dry than a damp place. But for the flitches of a hog of 5 score, in weather not very dry or damp, about 6 weeks may do, and as yours is to be fat, which receives little injury from over-salting, give time enough, for you are to have bacon until Christmas comes again. 807. The place for salting should, like a dairy, always be cool but well ventilated. Confined air, though cool, will taint meat sooner than the midday sun accompanied by a breeze. With regard to smoking the bacon, 2 precautions are necessary. First, to hang the flitches where no rain comes down upon them, and next, that the smoke must proceed from wood, not peat, turf, or coal. As to the time required to smoke a flitch, it depends a great deal upon whether there be a constant fire beneath, and whether the fire be large or small. A month will do if the fire be pretty constant and rich, as a farmhouse fire usually is, but over-smoking, or rather too long hanging in the air, makes the bacon rust. Great attention should therefore be paid to this matter. The flitch ought not to be dried up to the hardness of a board, and yet it ought to be perfectly dry. Before you hang it up, lay it on the floor, scatter the flesh side pretty thickly over with bran, or with some fine sawdust, not of deal or fir, rub it on the flesh, or pat it well down upon it. This keeps the smoke from getting into the little openings, and makes a sort of crust to be dried on. 808. To keep the bacon sweet and good and free from hoppers, sift fine some clean and dry wood ashes, put some at the bottom of a box or chest long enough to hold a flitch of bacon. Lay in 1 flitch, and then put in more ashes, then another flitch, and cover this with 6 or 8 inches of the ashes. The place where the box or chest is kept ought to be dry, and should the ashes become damp, they should be put in the fireplace to dry, and when cold put back again. With these precautions, the bacon will be as good at the end of the year as on the first day. 809. For simple general rules, these may be safely taken as a guide, and those who implicitly follow the directions given will possess at the expiration of from 6 weeks to 2 months well flavoured and well cured bacon. Hog, not bacon. Antidote of Lord Bacon. As Lord Bacon on one occasion was about to pass sentence of death upon a man of the name of Hogg, who had just been tried for a long career of crime, the prisoner suddenly claimed to be heard in arrest of judgment, saying, with an expression of arch confidence as he addressed the bench, "I claim indulgence, my lord, on the plea of relationship, for I am convinced your lordship will never be unnatural enough to hang one of your own family." "Indeed," replied the judge with some amazement, "I was not aware that I had the honour of your alliance. Perhaps you will be good enough to name the degree of our mutual affinity." "I am sorry, my lord," replied the impudent thief, "I cannot trace the links of consanguinity, but the moral evidence is sufficiently pertinent. My name, my lord, is Hogg, your lordship's is Bacon, and all the world will allow that Bacon and Hogg are very closely allied." "I am sorry," replied his lordship, "I cannot admit the truth of your instance. Hogg cannot be Bacon until it is hanged, and so, before I can admit your plea or acknowledge the family compact, Hogg must be hanged tomorrow morning. To bake a ham. 810. Ingredients: ham, a common crust. Mode. As a ham for baking should be well soaked, let it remain in water for at least 12 hours. Wipe it dry, trim away any rusty places underneath, and cover it with a common crust, taking care that this is a sufficient thickness all over to keep the gravy in. Place it in a moderately heated oven, and bake for nearly 4 hours. Take off the crust and skin, and cover with raspings, the same as for boiled ham, and garnish the knuckle with a paper frill. This method of cooking a ham is, by many persons, considered far superior to boiling it, as it cuts fuller of gravy and has a finer flavour, besides keeping a much longer time good. Time. A medium-sized ham, 4 hours. Average cost, from 8d. to 10d. per pound by the whole ham. Seasonable all year round. To boil a ham. 811. Ingredients: ham, water, glaze or raspings. Mode. In choosing a ham, ascertain that it is perfectly sweet by running a sharp knife into it close to the bone, and if, when the knife is withdrawn, it has an agreeable smell, the ham is good. If, on the contrary, the blade has a greasy appearance and offensive smell, the ham is bad. If it has been long hung and is very dry and salt, let it remain in soak for 24 hours, changing the water frequently. This length of time is only necessary in the case of it being very hard. From 8 to 12 hours would be sufficient for a Yorkshire or Westmoreland ham. Wash it thoroughly, and trim away from the underside all the rusty and smoked parts, which would spoil the appearance. Put it into a boiling pot with sufficient cold water to cover it. Bring it gradually to boil, and, as the scum rises, carefully remove it. Keep it simmering very gently until tender, and be careful that it does not stop boiling, nor boil too quickly. When done, take it out of the pot, strip off the skin, and sprinkle over it a few fine bread raspings. Put a frill of cut paper around the knuckle, and serve. If to be eaten cold, let the ham remain in the water until nearly cold. By this method the juices are kept in, and it will be found infinitely superior to one taken out of the water hot. It should, however, be borne in mind that the ham must not remain in the saucepan all night. When the skin is removed, sprinkle over bread raspings, or, if wanted particularly nice, glaze it. Place a paper frill round the knuckle, and garnish with parsley or cut vegetable flowers. Time. A ham weighing 10 pounds, 4 hours to simmer gently. 15 pounds, 5 hours. A very large one, about 5 hours. Average cost, from 8d. to 10d. per pound by the whole ham. Seasonable all the year round. How to boil a ham to give it an excellent flavour. 812. Ingredients: vinegar and water, 2 heads of celery, 2 turnips,
3 onions, a large bunch of savoury herbs. Mode. Prepare the ham as in the preceding recipe, and let it soak for a few hours in vinegar and water. Put it on in cold water, and when it boils, add the vegetables and herbs. Simmer very gently until tender. Take it out, strip off the skin, cover with bread raspings, and put in a paper ruche or frill around the knuckle. Time. A ham weighing 10 pounds, 4 hours. Average cost, 8d. to 10d. per pound by the whole ham. Seasonable at any time. How to silence a pig. Anecdote of Charles V. When the Emperor Charles V was one day walking in the neighbourhood of Vienna, full of pious considerations engendered by the thoughts of the Dominican cloister he was about to visit, he was much annoyed by the noise of a pig, which a country youth was carrying a little way before him. At length, irritated by the unmitigated noise, "Have you not learned how to quiet a pig?" demanded the imperial traveller tartly. "No, replied the ingenuous peasant, ignorant of the quality of his interrogator. "No, I should very much like to know how to do it," changing the position of his burthen, and giving his load a surreptitious pinch on the ear, which immediately altered the tone and volume of his complaining. "Why, take the pig by the tail," said the Emperor, "and you will see how quiet he will become." Struck by the novelty of the suggestion, the countryman at once dangled his noisy companion by the tail, and soon discovered that, under the partial congestion caused by its inverted position, the pig had indeed become silent, when, looking with admiration on his august adviser, he exclaimed, "Ah, you must have learnt the trade much longer than I, for you understand it a great deal better." Fried ham and eggs, a breakfast dish. 813. Ingredients: ham, eggs. Mode. Cut the ham into slices, and take care they are of the same thickness in every part. Cut off the rind, and if the ham should be particularly hard and salt, it will be found an improvement to soak it for about 10 minutes in hot water, and then dry it in a cloth. Put it into a cold frying pan, set it over the fire, and turn the slices 3 or 4 times whilst they are cooking. When done, place them on a dish, which should be kept hot in front of the fire during the time the eggs are being poached. Poach the eggs, slip them on to the slices of ham, and serve quickly. Time. 7 or 8 minutes to broil the ham. Average cost, from 8d. to 10d. per pound by the whole ham. Seasonable at any time. Note. Ham may also be toasted or broiled, but with the latter method, to ensure it being well cooked, the fire must be beautifully clear, or it will have a smoky flavour far from agreeable. Potted ham that will keep good for some time. 1. 814. Ingredients: to 4 lbs. of lean ham allow 1 lb. of fat, 2 teaspoonfuls of powdered mace, half a nutmeg grated, rather more than half a teaspoonful of cayenne, clarified lard. Mode. Mince the ham, fat, and lean together in the above proportions, and pound it well in a mortar, seasoning it with cayenne pepper, pounded mace, and nutmeg. Put the mixture into a deep baking dish and bake for half an hour. Then press it well into a stone jar, fill up the jar with clarified lard, cover it closely, and paste over a piece of thick paper. If well seasoned, it will keep a long time in winter, and will be found very convenient for sandwiches, &c. Time. Half an hour. Seasonable at any time. 2. A nice addition to the breakfast or luncheon table. 815. Ingredients: to 2 lbs. of lean ham allow half a pound of fat, 1 teaspoonful of powdered mace, half a teaspoonful of pounded allspice, half a nutmeg, pepper to taste, clarified butter. Mode. Cut some slices from the remains of a cold ham. Mince them small, and to every 2 lbs. of lean allow the above proportion of fat. Pound the ham in a mortar to a fine paste with the fat. Gradually add the seasoning and spices, and be very particular that all the ingredients are well mixed, and the spices well pounded. Press the mixture into potting pots, pour over clarified butter, and keep in a cool place. Average cost for this quantity, 2s. 6d. Seasonable at any time. Importance of the boar's head, Scottish feuds, etc. The boar's head in ancient times formed the most important dish on the table, and was invariably the first placed on the board upon Christmas Day, being preceded by a body of servitors, a flourish of trumpets, and other marks of distinction and reverence, and carried into the hall by the individual of next rank to the lord of the feast. At some of our colleges and inns of court, the serving of the boar's head on a silver platter on Christmas Day is a custom still followed, and until very lately a boar's head was competed for at Christmas time by the young men of a rural parish in Essex. Indeed, so highly was the grizzly boar's head regarded in former times, that it passed into a cognizance of some of the noblest families in the realm. Thus it was not only the crest of the Nevilles and Warwicks with their collateral houses, but it was the cognizance of Richard III, that "wretched, bloody, and usurping boar, that spoiled your summer fields and fruitful vines, swills your warm blood like wash, and makes his trough in your embowelled bosoms," and whose nature it was supposed to typify, and was universally used as a sign to taverns. The boar's head in Eastcheap, which till within the last 25 years still stood in all its primitive quaintness, though removed to make way for the London Bridge approaches, it will live vividly in the mind of every reader of Shakespeare as the resort of the Prince of Wales, Poins and his companions, and the residence of Falstaff and his coney-catching knaves, Bardolph, Pistol, and Nym, and whose sign was a boar's head, carved in stone over the door, and a smaller one in wood on each side of the doorway. The traditions and deeds of savage vengeance recorded in connection with this grim trophy of the chase are numerous in all parts of Europe, but the most remarkable connected with the subject in this country were two events that occurred in Scotland about the 11th and 15th century. A Border family, having been dispossessed of their castle and lands by a more powerful chief, were reduced for many years to great indigence, the expelled owner only living in the hope of wreaking a terrible vengeance, which, agreeably to the motto of his house, he was content to bide his time for. The usurper, having invited a large number of his kindred to a grand hunt in his new domains, and a feast after in the great hall, returned from the chase, and discovered the feast not spread, vented his wrath in no measured terms on the heads of the tardy servitors. At length the menial approached, followed by a line of servants, and placing the boar's head on the table, the guests rushed forward to begin the meal, when to their horror they discovered not a boar's but a bull's head, a sign of death. The doors were immediately closed, and the false servants, who were the adherents of the dispossessed chief, threw off their disguise, and falling on the usurper and his friend, butchered them and every soul in the castle belonging to the rival faction. A tribe of Caterans, or mountain robbers, in the Western Highlands, having been greatly persecuted by a powerful chief of the district, waylaid him and his retinue, put them all to the sword, and cutting off the chief's head, repaired to his castle, where they ordered the terrified wife to supply them with food and drink. To appease their savage humour, the lady gave order for their entertainment, and on returning to the hall to see her orders were complied with, discovered, in place of the boar's head that should have graced the board, her husband's bleeding head. The savage Caterans, in rude derision, as a substitute for the apple or lemon usually placed between the jaws, having thrust a slice of bread in the dead man's mouth. For curing hams, Monsieur Ude's recipe. 816. Ingredients. For 2 hams weighing about 16 or 18 pounds each, allow 1 pound of moist sugar, 1 pound of common salt, 2 ounces of saltpetre, 1 quart of good vinegar. Mode. As soon as the pig is cold enough to be cut up, take the 2 hams and rub them well with common salt, and leave them in a large pan for 3 days. When the salt has drawn out all the blood, drain the hams and throw the brine away. Mix sugar, salt, and saltpetre together in the above proportion, rub the hams well with these, and put them into a vessel large enough to hold them, always keeping the salt over them. Let them remain for 3 days, then pour over them a quart of good vinegar. Turn them in the brine every day for a month, then drain them well and rub them with bran. Have them smoked over a wood fire, and be particular that the hams are hung as high as possible from the fire, otherwise the fat will melt and they will become dry and hard. Time. To be pickled 1 month, to be smoked 1 month. Sufficient for 2 hams of 18 pounds each. Seasonable from October to March. The price of a sow in Africa. In one of the native states of Africa, a pig one day stole a piece of food from a child as it was in the act of conveying the morsel to its mouth, upon which the robbed child cried so loud that the mother rushed out of her hovel to ascertain the cause, and seeing the purloining pig make off munching his booty, the woman in her heat struck the grunter so smart a blow that the surly rascal took it into his head to go home very much indisposed, and after a certain time resolved to die, a resolution that he accordingly put into practice, upon which the owner instituted judicial proceedings before the Star Chamber Court of his tribe, against the husband and family of the woman whose rash act had led to such results. And as the pig happened to be a sow, in the very flower of her age, the prospective loss to the owner in unnumbered teams of pigs, with the expenses attending so high a tribunal, swelled the damages and costs to such a sum that it was found impossible to pay them. And as, in the barbarous justice existing amongst these rude people, every member of a family is equally liable as the individual who committed the wrong, the father, mother, children, relatives, an entire community, for the sum of 32 souls, were sold as slaves, and a fearful sum of human misery perpetrated, to pay the value of a thieving old sow. To salt 2 hams, about 12 or 15 pounds each. 817. Ingredients: 2 pounds of treacle, half a pound of saltpetre, 1 pound of bay salt, 2 pounds of common salt. Mode. 2 days before they are put into the pickle, rub the hams well with salt, to draw away all slime and blood. Throw what comes from them away, and then rub them with treacle, saltpetre, and salt. Lay them in a deep pan, and let them remain 1 day. Boil the above proportion of treacle, saltpetre, bay salt, and common salt for 1/4 hour, and pour this pickle boiling hot over the hams. There should be sufficient of it to cover them. For a day or 2, rub them well with it. Afterwards they will only require turning. They ought to remain in this pickle for 3 weeks or a month, and then be sent to be smoked, which will take nearly or quite a month to do. An ox tongue pickled in this way is most excellent, to be eaten either green or smoked. Time. To remain in the pickle 3 weeks or a month, to be smoked about a month. Seasonable from October to March. To cure sweet hams in the Westmoreland way. 818. Ingredients: 3 pounds of common salt, 3 pounds of coarse sugar, 1 pound of bay salt, 3 quarts of strong beer. Mode. Before the hams are put into pickle, rub them the preceding day well with salt, and drain the brine well from them. Put the above ingredients into a sauce and boil for 1/4 hour. Pour over the hams, and let them remain a month in the pickle. Rub and turn them every day, but do not take them out of the pickling pan, and have them smoked for a month. Time. To be pickled 1 month. To be smoked 1 month. Seasonable from October to March. To pickle hams Suffolk recipe. 819. Ingredients: to a ham from 10 to 12 pounds, allow 1 pound of coarse sugar, 3/4 pound of salt, 1 ounce of saltpetre, half a teacupful of vinegar. Mode. Rub the hams well with common salt, and leave them for a day or 2 to drain. Then rub well in the above proportions of sugar, salt, saltpetre, and vinegar, and turn them every other day. Keep them in the pickle 1 month, drain them, and send them to be smoked over a wood fire for 3 weeks to a month. Time. To remain in the pickle 1 month. To be smoked 3 weeks or 1 month. Sufficient. The above proportion of pickle sufficient for 1 ham. Seasonable. Ham should be pickled from October to March. Novel way of recovering a stolen pig. It is a well-known fact that in Ireland the pig is, in every respect, a domesticated animal, sharing often both the bed and board of the family, and making an outer ring to the domestic circle, as, seated round the pot of potatoes, they partake of the midday meal called dinner. An Irishman, upon one occasion, having lost an interesting member of his household, in the form of a promising young porker, consulted his priest on the occasion, and having hinted at the person he suspected of purloining the elegant slip of a pig, he was advised to take no further notice of the matter, but leave the issue to his spiritual adviser. Next Sunday his reverence, after Mass, came to the front of the altar rail, and looking very hard at the supposed culprit, exclaimed, "Who stole Pat Doolan's pig?" To this inquiry there was of course no answer. The priest did not expect there would be any. The following Sunday the same query was propounded a little stronger. "Who of you was it, I say, who stole poor Patrick Doolan's pig?" It now became evident that the culprit was a hardened sinner. So on the third Sunday, instead of repeating the unsatisfactory inquiry, the priest, after as usual eyeing the obdurate offender, said, in a tone of pious sorrow, Mike Regan, you treat me with contempt." That night, when the family was all asleep, the latch of the door was noiselessly lifted, and the elegant slip of a pig cautiously slipped into the cabin. To smoke hams and fish at home. 8:20. Take an old hogshead, stop up all the crevices, and fix a place to put a cross stick near the bottom, to hang the articles to be smoked on. Next, in the side, cut a hole near the top, to introduce an iron pan filled with sawdust, and small pieces of green wood. Having turned the tub upside down, hang the articles upon the cross stick, introduce the iron pan in the opening, and place a piece of red-hot iron in the pan, cover it with sawdust, and all will be complete. Let a large ham remain 40 hours, and keep up a good smoke. To cure bacon or hams in the Devonshire way. 8:21. Ingredients. To every 14 pounds of meat allow 2 ounces of saltpetre, 2 ounces of salt prunella, 1 pound of common salt. For the pickle, 3 gallons of water, 5 pounds of common salt, 7 pounds of coarse sugar, 3 pounds of bay salt. Mode. Weigh the sides, hams, and cheeks, and to every 14 pounds allow the above proportion of saltpetre, salt prunella, and common salt. Pound and mix these together, and rub well into the meat. Lay it in a stone trough or tub, rubbing it thoroughly and turning it daily for 2 successive days. At the end of the second day, pour on it a pickle made as follows. Put the above ingredients into a saucepan, set it on the fire, and stir frequently. Remove all the scum, allow it to boil for 1/4 of an hour, and pour it hot over the meat. Let the hams, etc., be well rubbed and turned daily. If the meat is small, a fortnight will be sufficient for the sides and shoulders to remain in the pickle, and the hams 3 weeks. If from 30 pounds and upwards, 3 weeks will be required for the sides, and from 4 to 5 weeks for the hams. On taking the pieces out, let them drain for an hour, cover with dry sawdust, and smoke from a fortnight to 3 weeks. Boil and carefully skim the pickle after using, and it will keep good, closely corked, for 2 years. When boiling it for use, add about 2 pounds of common salt and the same of treacle, to allow for waste. Tongues are excellent put into this pickle cold, having been first rubbed well with saltpetre and salt, and allowed to remain 24 hours, not forgetting to make a deep incision under the thick part of the tongue, so as to allow the pickle to penetrate more readily. A fortnight or 3 weeks, according to the size of the tongue, will be sufficient. Time. Small meat to remain in the pickle a fortnight, hams 3 weeks, to be smoked from a fortnight to 3 weeks. End of section 37.